Relational or ethical pacifism begins from a radically different place than theological commandments, political strategy, or institutional design. It begins not with war or the state, but with the face-to-face encounter between persons. Its core claim is deceptively simple and philosophically demanding. Violence is wrong because it destroys the possibility of moral relationship. In this tradition, pacifism is not primarily about rules, outcomes, or policies. It is about what happens to ethics itself when violence enters the relationship between human beings. Violence does not merely harm bodies, it annihilates moral address, silencing the other as a speaking, commanding presence. Ethics before politics. Relational pacifism insists that ethics precedes politics. Before there are laws, institutions, or strategic calculations, there is the encounter with another human being who makes a moral claim upon us. This encounter is fragile. It depends on recognition, responsiveness, and restraint. Violence shatters this space. Once force is introduced, the other is no longer encountered as a subject, but reduced to an object, something to be controlled, neutralized, or eliminated. Ethical pacifism therefore rejects violence, not because it always fails strategically or violates divine law, but because it abolishes the very conditions under which ethics is possible. Emmanuel Levinas, The Face and the Prohibition of Violence. Emmanuel Levinas provides the most influential philosophical articulation of relational pacifism. For Levinas, ethics begins with the encounter with the face of the other. The face is not merely a physical appearance, it is the manifestation of vulnerability and command. It silently says, "Do not kill me." This prohibition is not derived from law, religion, or social contract. It arises immediately in the encounter itself. The other person's exposure, fragility, and irreducible alterity place a demand upon me before I have time to calculate, justify, or rationalize. Violence, in Levinas's account, is not simply immoral action. It is the refusal of encounter. To harm or kill the other is to deny their capacity to address me morally. Violence ends dialogue by replacing responsibility with domination. Levinas does not argue that violence is always empirically avoidable. He argues something more unsettling. Once violence occurs, ethics has already failed. War, in this sense, represents not just political collapse, but ethical collapse, the substitution of force for responsibility. Martin Buber, From I-Thou to I-It. Martin Buber's dialogical philosophy offers a complementary account of relational pacifism. In I and thou, Buber distinguishes between two fundamental modes of relation, I-thou and I-it. I-thou relationships are mutual, present, and responsive. The other is encountered as a whole person. I-it relationships are instrumental. The other is treated as an object to be used, managed, or analyzed. Violence, for Buber, represents the extreme form of the I-it relationship. It collapses the thou into an it entirely. The violent act is not only physical harm, it is the final reduction of the other to something that no longer speaks. Relational pacifism emerges here as a commitment to preserving I-thou relations, even under conditions of conflict. Once violence becomes acceptable, relationships are reorganized around utility and power rather than presence and mutuality. Moral encounter as the core of peace. Relational pacifism defines peace not as the absence of war, but as the presence of ethical encounter. Peace exists wherever human beings remain responsive to one another as moral subjects, even amid disagreement, fear, or tension. From this perspective, violence is uniquely destructive because it does more than break rules or escalate conflict. It destroys the space of moral responsiveness. After violence, the other no longer appears as a neighbor, but as an enemy, target, or threat. This explains why relational pacifism is often skeptical of arguments that justify violence for higher ends. Even when violence claims to protect justice or security, it does so by sacrificing the very ethical relation that gives those goods meaning. Distinctiveness of relational pacifism. Relational pacifism differs sharply from other pacifist traditions. Unlike absolute pacifism, it does not necessarily claim that violence is always forbidden by divine command. Unlike strategic nonviolence, it does not rest on effectiveness or success. Unlike legal pacifism, it does not trust institutions alone to secure peace. Instead, it insists that ethical responsibility is irreducible. No system, strategy, or justification can fully compensate for the moral loss incurred when violence replaces encounter. This makes relational pacifism both powerful and demanding. It offers no simple policy prescriptions and no guarantees of safety. What it offers is a relentless insistence that ethics begins and ends with how we treat the other in front of us. Conclusion: violence as ethical rupture. Relational or ethical pacifism reframes violence as a rupture in moral reality itself. To be violent is not merely to break a rule or miscalculate a strategy. It is to refuse the other's claim upon us as a human being. In the work of Levinas and Buber, pacifism becomes an ethical posture grounded in attentiveness, restraint, and responsibility. Peace is sustained not by force or law alone, but by the fragile daily work of remaining open to the other as a thou rather than an it. In this sense, relational pacifism does not promise a world without conflict. It promises something more fundamental, a refusal to let conflict erase the possibility of ethics itself.